When you look back at the start of the 21st century for the United States, it really felt like one shock to the system after another. It was this chaotic, defining era that completely rewrote the rules on national security, kicked off what felt like endless wars, and brought huge questions about the environment to a boiling point. But to really understand how all these pieces connect, you have to go back to the single day that started it all. So let's unpack the moments that truly changed everything.
And this quote, it just gets right to the heart of it. The attacks on September 11th, 2001 became the lens, right? It was the filter through which almost every major event for the next 20 years would be seen and judged, not just in the US, but around the world. This wasn't just another historical event. It was like a fundamental rewiring of the entire national psyche.
So to really get a handle on the decades that followed, the wars, the new laws, the tensions in our society, we have to go back. We've got to unpack the events of that single, horrifying morning.
On that day, al-Qaeda operatives hijacked 4 commercial airliners, and everything just unfolded with this terrifying speed. In less than 2 hours, 2 of those planes hit the World Trade Center towers in New York. A third slammed into the Pentagon, literally the headquarters of the U.S. military. And the fourth, Flight 93, went down in a field in Pennsylvania, but only after the passengers and crew heroically fought back against the hijackers.
The human cost, it's just hard to even wrap your head around it. Nearly 3,000 lives were lost in a single morning. And the reaction across the country, it was more than just shock or grief. It was this deep, collective trauma that just gripped everybody.
And that collective trauma, it immediately morphed into this powerful, unifying call for justice. It was described as a ferocious demand for action, a lot like the national unity we saw after Pearl Harbor. The country wasn't just sad, it was angry, and it demanded a response, a demand that would very soon be answered with force.
And right here, this is where everything begins to change. That national cry for justice led directly to the first of several huge military interventions. And it kicked off a fundamental redefinition of American foreign policy, ushering in what would become a totally new kind of war. So the first target was Afghanistan. President George W. Bush gave a really clear ultimatum to the Taliban, who were in charge there and were protecting the al-Qaeda terrorists. Hand over Osama bin Laden. Well, the Taliban refused, so the U.S. invaded. And while the initial invasion toppled their regime pretty quickly, the mission just changed. It ballooned into this incredibly complex 20-year-long counterinsurgency. We went from hunting a person to trying to build a nation while fighting an enemy that could just melt back into the population.
But here's the thing. Even as the war in Afghanistan was just getting started, the administration's focus was already shifting. It was moving toward what would become the most controversial military action of the entire era, the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Okay, this part is absolutely critical to understanding the whole period. To justify the war, the administration made 2 huge public claims. 1, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, and 2, that he was somehow linked to the 9/11 attacks. The problem? It turned out neither of those things was true. They were later definitively disproven, and that really damaged America's credibility on the world stage.
Now, this whole idea, invading a country based on a threat you think might be coming, signaled a major shift in strategy. It came to be known as the Bush Doctrine. It's this concept of preemptive war. The argument was, look, in a world with terrorists, we can't afford to wait to get hit first. The U.S. has the right to act first, to take out threats before they can even get off the ground.
This slide really shows you the difference. The old way, back in the Cold War, was all about deterrence. It was a strategic waiting game. You wait for the other guy to make a move. The Bush Doctrine completely flipped that. It said we have to act on potential threats. This was a radical break from the past, and it started this intense global debate about America's role in the world.
But this idea of acting on perceived threats, it didn't just stay overseas. Oh no, it came roaring right back home, and it led to this massive restructuring of American law and even our daily lives. The war on terror had a home front, for sure.
The fear after 9/11 brought this classic American tug-of-war into the spotlight like never before. All of a sudden, the central debate was this: how do you balance national security, that urgent need to stop another attack, with protecting the individual civil liberties that are at the core of the Constitution?
And this tension really came to life in laws like the Patriot Acts. They were rushed through Congress, all in the name of preventing the next attack, and they gave the government sweeping new powers of surveillance. They could monitor phone calls and emails more broadly, and they created these things called national security letters, which let the FBI demand records without needing a traditional warrant. The pushback was immediate. Critics argued it was a direct attack on constitutional rights, especially the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable searches.
And it went beyond just new laws. We saw a huge structural response, too. This fear of another attack led to the biggest reorganization of the U.S. government in more than 50 years.
And what came out of that was the Department of Homeland Security. The idea was to fix the communication breakdowns that allowed 9/11 to happen in the first place. The scale of this was just immense. They took more than 20 federal agencies, we're talking everyone from the Coast Guard and FEMA to the Secret Service, and mashed them all together under one giant roof. As you can imagine, trying to get all those different cultures and missions to work together overnight created some unbelievable challenges.
You know, unfortunately, this supercharged environment also created a lot of friction here at home. One of the most painful and lasting consequences of this whole era was a very real, documented rise in Islamophobia. Prejudice and discrimination against Muslim and Arab Americans became widespread, and it created a climate of fear that threatened the religious freedoms of so many communities.
Okay, so you've got these long, drawn-out wars overseas, and these deep, sweeping changes happening at home. And all of that chaos brings another set of huge issues roaring back to the forefront: the complicated relationship between conflict, our reliance on oil, and America's standing in the world.
I mean, it's pretty obvious when you think about it, right? Having constant conflict in the Middle East was a stark, daily reminder of just how dependent the United States was on foreign oil. Every time things got unstable in that region, it sent shockwaves right through the U.S. economy. It just laid bare the massive risk of relying so much on energy from such a volatile part of the world.
And at the exact same time, the science on climate change was becoming undeniable, and the public was really starting to talk about it. But in Washington, the whole issue got completely polarized. It broke down along typical party lines. Democrats generally pushed for more environmental regulations, while many Republicans worried about the economic cost of those rules. And the result was just political gridlock.
And all of this created what you could call the ultimate paradox. The U.S. military, which we rely on to project power and protect those global energy supply lines, is also one of the world's biggest consumers of fossil fuels. So the very act of securing the global system was directly contributing to the climate crisis that was threatening that exact same system. It's a real head-scratcher.
And yet, despite all these challenges, the U.S. remained the world's leading superpower. How? Well, the reason really comes down to four interconnected pillars of its influence. First, its military is just unmatched. Second, its economy and its tech sector are dominant, especially as the digital world exploded. Third, it still carried immense diplomatic weight. And fourth, it used what's called soft power, things like humanitarian aid and disaster relief, which helped reinforce its image as a global leader.
And that brings us to our final thought. This entire era, born from the ashes of 9/11, created this deep structural conflict that we still haven't solved today. So the big, crucial question we're left with is this: how does a nation square its long-term military and economic priorities, which still depends so heavily on fossil fuels, with the incredibly urgent scientific need to tackle catastrophic climate change? That right there, that's the central tension of our post-2001 world.